Hi, and welcome to an episode of the JetRails podcast. I'm Robert Rand, your host, and today we're going to be talking about Magento reaching end of life for Magento 1, and Magento is not going to be extending that. So there were some folks in the community that may have called for or hoped that Magento, given the current COVID-19 crisis that businesses are facing, that there may have been an extension. But as we in the industry, by and large, have been anticipating, merchants do still need to plan for what to do as Magento 1 reaches its end of life and how to continue to keep their businesses operating safely and successfully. And so we today are in luck. We're able to get Rico from Mage 1, a team that has built themselves up now out of existing history in the Magento community with this new organization with the explicit purpose of helping folks stay securely and safely on Magento 1. Rico, would you do the honors of introducing yourself?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here. Yeah, my name is Rico. I'm very into the Magento community since about 12 years now. And when back in the days, it was just Magento. When they decided to switch off Magento 1, it was a very short notice there, and a lot of people were very frightened. So we created the idea because a lot of merchants had the urge to stay with Magento 1 because they were right in the process of building their Magento stores or still maintaining their Magento stores, but there was not anyone thinking about switching from it within 6 weeks. So what we did is we talked to Mark Lavelle back in the days in 2018 in Leipzig at a Meet Magento event and tried to explain to him that this is a very hard decision he does there. And then he decided, okay, let's give them another notice. So it was an 18-month notice then. And we put our idea back in the tray. And once finally Magento and Adobe decided to announce the end of life for Magento, we said, okay, we have an idea ready here. And then we start to form ourselves to build the company, to build the idea behind continuing the support for Magento 1, creating patches, creating upgrade patches for PHP, MySQL, Apache Nginx, all that stuff. Yeah, this was the main idea behind Mage 1. And that's why I'm here today to talk a little bit more about the end of life of Magento 1 and what comes after that for merchants and agencies.
So Mage 1 is a relatively young organization, but you're now onboarding merchants. And I suppose the goal is that as soon as Magento 1 hits end of life, in essence, those merchants will receive their security patches and any other related updates from Mage 1, since they won't be getting any more patches from Adobe, from Magento.
Yeah, that's basically the idea behind our service. So what we basically do is we will take over from where Adobe leaves Magento. So we just pick it up. We will create the patches. So a merchant can sign up for our services. An agency can sign up for their merchants with our services. And then they will get patch files. And these patch files will patch security vulnerabilities within the Magento 1 core code. And and if there is an upgrade for PHP, which is right around the corner, so PHP 7.2, 7.3, and so on. So we are producing those patches as well, so you can stay up to date and secure even with your server software. I mean, I'm talking to the right person here about server software, yeah, and I can totally understand if a hosting company really is scared away by merchants with Magento 1.3, 1.4, just running on PHP 5.6. So it's heavily outdated, and we try to fix those issues for the Magento 1.9 merchants so they can stay up to date and secure even with their local installation and local software.
Yeah. So in essence, if a merchant was already staying out of date, in order to leverage Mage 1, they're going to need to get themselves at least up to a version of Magento 1.9 in order to leverage the patches that you'll be putting out. But generally speaking, businesses that weren't upkeeping, they may not have been addressing PCI compliance or general security in the first place. So now's as good a time as any to get caught up. But chances are that your major following is going to be amongst those merchants that are already at 1.9 something, and that hopefully aren't woefully behind in PHP versions and other server software.
Yeah, that's correct. So in order to use our services, you have to be at the latest Magento version. So which is 1.9.4.4 at the moment. So I have no idea whether Adobe will release another version just before they leave off in June or end of June. So probably it's a 0.5 then. But yeah, you have to be at the latest version, and it's not a big deal for those merchants who just kept patching their shop in the last years, because in 1.9 there were no new features. So if you patch your Magento store, it's more or less equal to a version upgrade. So there's not really a big difference. It's a different story for merchants that are still using 1.7, probably also 1.8. So there's a little bit work to be done. But yeah, I mean, at the end, you want to have security. So in that case, you also have to upgrade your Magento store.
Yeah. Well, and I like to think, and the way I always talk about it is that you want your customers and your employees to be part of something safe. It's dangerous to leave that all up in the air, because you can do a lot of damage very quickly if you do allow your security to get the best of you. And we see it all too often, of course, in the industry. We read it in the news sometimes for bigger organizations, but it doesn't really matter how big or small your website or your business is, that there are hackers out there that are basically just scanning every Magento site they can find and looking to see if certain vulnerabilities are available to exploit. So, we always caution basic security being a standard, not an option, of course, as I think anyone in the industry would.
Yeah, Magento is also a very worthy target. I mean, a lot of people are using it, and because it's rather complex, there is still some space left for security vulnerabilities. And in that case, I mean, yeah, for sure. If I would be a hacker, I would look into Magento as well.
Yeah,
a lot of big companies are using Magento, so this is also a very worthy target then. And usually, also bigger companies don't have both eyes on security first.
Yeah. And, one of our recent podcast episodes was with the team from Sakuri. And that was an interesting conversation, that they do see platforms like Magento and WordPress with eCommerce and other popular platforms get attacked more often. But that's, of course, because, if you're a hacker, law of averages, if you go out there and scan enough of the sites built on these platforms, you'll find some that are out of date and vulnerable. Yeah. And so it's really just about doing your due diligence in most cases as a business owner. Same thing, you wouldn't leave the doors to your retail store unlocked overnight or the door wide open. There are precautions that you need to take. Obviously, dealing with e-commerce security, there might be some labor and cost involved, but that is cost of business in essence.
Yeah, but it's not that visible like an open door. It's just I know, imaginary threat that might be there somehow, but it's not something that you can touch or feel, and that's why it's such a problem for merchants to understand that security is so important and to keep software upgraded. I mean, how many people are still using Windows XP?
Yeah. There are even ATMs, even bank machines that are still running Windows XP out there in the world. So, it's surprising that sometimes there are these outdated technologies, and you wonder how people allow that to happen. But we do understand that there are business decisions to be made, and there are priorities, and I think that's why companies like Magento are trying to make it easier. If I could. Try to, think about it from your perspective. I know that from the JetRails perspective, it's why all of our customers are enjoying web access, firewalling, virtual firewalling included with our plans. They're getting malware detection and intrusion detection and other standards for security and for PCI compliance.
Yep.
We don't believe that Magento users should be going without these things. I think that's a part of the challenge, is that for a lot of users, they may not understand what their options are. They may not understand what they're missing or what they should be doing. So, I think we all spend a lot of time educating the market because a lot of businesses are out there to be retailers or wholesalers or Otherwise, to be vendors of products and not necessarily tech companies. And it doesn't always have to be hard if you bring in the right experts. So whether that's your digital agency to take the reins, whether that's bringing in vendors that'll help you along the way, like your web host or what have you. I think that's most often the issue, is just surrounding yourself with the right resources so that you don't have to be a tech expert.
No.
And, speaking of surrounding yourself with the right people at Mage One, what does your team look like? I know that there are other projects out there that have been putting out different forks of Magento and different things. I know your organization is set up as more of a commercial organization where users can sign up with an agreement and expect patches to come out on an ongoing basis, the way that they've always gotten them from Magento. Who is writing these patches, and what does your team look like?
So our team is a bunch of people also like me, working with Magento since years. So we have Carmen Brehme, which is a Magento master multiple times. We have Fabian Blechschmidt, who is doing a lot of Magento-related stuff, doing organization of hackathons, on conferences. And then we do have Tobias Vogt, who is the guy behind the web guy. So a lot of people in the German-speaking area know him from the Christmas calendar. So there was a community-driven project about teaching people Magento back then. Then we have Tobias, who is with me in my company here. So this is our team with about 5 people. And we are all working on a lot of projects at the moment together, but we will split up into several departments once the actual work starts in July. So we have people specializing in writing the patches, especially for PHP and security. And we have people taking care of marketing, then of customer service, because we already have a lot of tickets being thrown at us with a lot of questions. A lot of enterprise customers lately interested in our services, which we, unfortunately, because of licensing issues with Adobe, we cannot help them directly. So this is a big issue for enterprise customers.
And so my understanding is that in essence, they may be able to continue to pay Adobe for use of their Magento 1 Enterprise Edition or Commerce Edition license, but they're not going to get any more patches or support. And because of that license, they just have to pay in order to keep their site turned on. Otherwise, they'd be out of compliance with their agreement with Adobe for that enterprise software.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, so that rock in a hard place.
And that's why a lot of enterprise merchants now switch back to the community edition, because they want to get rid of the license fees, and the money they save with not paying the license is well spent on downgrading to the community edition, and can then be invested into security for Magento 1. So they sign up for Mage 1 then with their community edition project, which is just fine. The other thing that you mentioned is to make it easy for people to jump on the security train for Magento 1. So you also had, I think it was Mark William Lewis talking about the OpenMage Mage LTS project.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, as far as I know, there are only 2 initiatives taking care of Magento 1 security. It's us, Mage 1, and then there is Mage LTS, which is an open source community-driven project. So we are the commercial part, they are the open source community part. The difference is that we see the urge from merchants that they really need a reliable company. They are willing to pay money for security, because what we try to do is keep up the bug bounty program of Adobe. And this is very crucial for security in Magento, because even if you have a lot of people working on it on a free will basis, you still need very skilled hackers looking into the source code. And to be honest, if I would be such a skilled person, I can make money with it, I will do that. So if I can sell a 0-day exploit for Magento on the black market for a few $1,000, sure, I would do that. Yeah. And this is,
I don't know if I'm trusting you with my car keys anymore, Rico.
That's so, but we know that. And the thing is that we try to get some money to buy those 0 days from them with a bug bounty. And this is something that OpenMage cannot do. They solely rely on the free will of community members doing that. And if there's some skilled hacker there, then probably they will get a security vulnerability as well. But I think the most crucial thing, and I mean, you can see that Adobe paid about 750,000, I think it was, yeah. So $750,000 just on bug bounty. That is a lot of money. And we try to raise the bar because Magento is very mature, and they have to incentivize people to basically look into it. Yeah, and this is what we try to do. That's why we are a company. That's why we try to get some money from our merchants to make sure that we can pay the bug bounty and that we can also sustain our business model for the next 5 years, because this is our goal. We want to make sure that merchants have 5 years from July 2020 on to make a sane decision, to make a decision with time and not in a rush, what they want to do with their e-commerce. So if they want to stay on Magento 1, Mage 1 for a few years and then switch to another platform, or if they start right away migrating, but still need more time because there are so many Magento 1 stores out there. And even if everyone wants to switch to Magento 2 in the next months, when we don't even have so many agencies, not even speaking about developers doing all that work. So even the agency needs to buy more time to do all the projects. And this is basically the gap that we want to fill here and make sure that everyone has enough time to stay secure, but still have time to migrate. And we don't see Magento in 5 years in the market anymore. So Magento 1.
No, I would hope
Magento
not.
2.
I don't know if the OpenMage folks would say the same, but from my perspective, I think that 5 years is more than I would have given it. And I appreciate merchants having choice of when to move. I know that this is a particularly turbulent time, so those that that were already engaged in projects to migrate or planning them, or who knows how different people are being affected in the current market. There are people out there in the Magento community like Karen Baker that were calling for Magento to try to extend end of life and try to support those merchants. Doesn't look like that's coming through, but at the same time, a wonderful sentiment to support those in the community. In the meantime, though, there are services like yours to help people continue to thrive. Now, we've talked a little bit about the security standpoint of it, but on the PCI compliance side, in essence, you'll provide patches. They'll have an amount of time to get those installed to stay compliant, and otherwise, you'll be their vendor, so they'll meet the hard requirement for PCI compliance of having vendor supplied patches. Would that be accurate?
Unfortunately, not quite, but almost. So the thing is that in our last talk with Visa, they said we are not telling our merchants which software to use. So they're free to use Magento 1. The thing is that at the end, a PCI assessor needs to decide whether you are compliant or not. So usually for most of the merchants, they do not process card data. So there is not the hard PCI requirement. At the end, they have to be required. They have to be compliant there, but they only have to fill in the SAQ, so a self-assessment questionnaire, where they can say, okay, we have some countermeasures against security issues in our company and for our online shops. And one of those pieces would be Mage 1. So if you really have a PCI certification running by a QSA, then it's best to be prepared and say, okay, these are the things that we do. We are using a hoster that is always up to date. They have a firewall. They have a web application firewall. We have trained people here in our company. We have a dedicated person taking care of online shop and security. We have Mage 1, which produces patches for our shop, which address security and upgradability with PHP or server software in general. Then we have a specialized security scanner like Sunsec.io. Then we have a supply chain security like Cerberus. And if you have all these steps ready, then the QSA that we were talking to said, okay, this is not a big deal. And then we can just give you the certification of compliance because you are well prepared. But if you are a merchant that's like, Oh, security. Yes. Okay.
But basically, those merchants weren't passing PCI compliance,
in the back
before Magento went into life. So,
I know.
So in essence, if I had to look at it, the major change, assuming that they were passing for compliance beforehand, it is going to be that Magento is not going to provide patching, and that hopefully that by getting something like Mage One, that they're covering their bases there.
We're doing even more than Adobe did. I mean, so I know from security issues, which lasted about 6 or 8 months. So from notice to patch, and from a PCI compliance point of view, this is terrible. And we want to raise the bar here as well. So we want to have our patches ready within 30 days. And our merchants are also required to install those patches within 30 days. So to make sure that our merchants really take care of security. Mm-hmm. And we also have an extension in place, which is called Quick Protection System, which works like a built-in web application firewall. So as soon as we get notice from anyone, like hosting companies like yours, for example, if they tell us, okay, here, guys, we saw that there is a bunch of requests hammering Magento stores. So we still have no idea what it's actually about, but here you can look into it. Then that's what we basically do, is we will investigate, we will figure out where it goes into Magento, and then we create a new rule for our WAF. And this will be deployed to our merchants using the Quick Protection extension. And then those requests will be stopped within Magento. So in that case, even if you don't have the patch ready yet, because for whatever reason, we are still developing it, or you had no time to install it right after you downloaded it, then you have an instant mitigation here. And probably a feature that has not been used in Magento stop working, which does not address anyone, neither your customers nor you as a merchant. And in that case, but you are staying safe. And for sure, having companies like yours that run web application firewalls, or even if you are hosting with other companies and have a Sucuri or a Cloudflare, a web application firewall in front of your store, then this is also one of those pieces that help you stay PCI compliant.
And, for JetRails customers, we partner with Sucuri, we partner with Cloudflare, we partner with Sanguine Security. By and large, you're getting these technologies included. We're not going to be upcharging users at the end of life of Magento 1. We're not going to be black boxing any technology. We're going to best in class services. We're working with others like Section.io that bring in different WAFs, and we'll continue to give our customers choice and option, and it will include some really, really solid technology and service off the bat. I know that other hosts are also stepping up their game around Magento went into life. The interesting thing that I think from the hosting perspective is that while a lot of hosting companies like JetRails are talking about Magento went into life and how we'll be helping merchants, a lot of the things that are to be done are really just best practice for hosting any Magento site in the first place. It's not, that we're talking about things that you should have already, that we feel very strongly about, that generally speaking, we're including for our merchants anyway. And that, we're really, I think, mainly speaking to merchants that aren't yet working with the right vendors out there to bring these technologies on board, or that don't want to self-manage 6 different vendors like this themselves. It's a lot of burden. Where a team like ours has an operations center, has a NOC, we're monitoring, we're handling these sorts of things already. So it's about, I'd say, half about having the right stuff, and the other half about how you use it, having the right people behind it that are going to actually, optimize it for your use case and monitor and maintain. So, maybe a little bit of a shameless plug there, but really for us, I do try to make sure that the conversation isn't completely about Magento went end of life and your hosting company. It's really about bringing the right tools to bear, and that absolutely includes patching from a vendor like Mage One. And Rico, I've been watching steadfastly, and I have only seen Mage 1 and OpenMage. So I don't think anything else is going to, at this point, be sneaking in. Famous last words, right? But before Magento 1 reaches into life, I don't think anything else could reach critical mass at this point that we would really consider open to the community and reliable and there to stick with it for some time. And, I think part of the reason that we've partnered up with your team is that we see the benefit to a team that has a plan to stick it out for years to come and to be the vendor that these merchants really are looking for. So, so there is always that. But, also keeping in mind that when we look at Magento 1 patches in recent time, like you said, in the Magento 1.9 family, we have not been seeing feature releases. We have not been seeing innovation. We've been seeing basically a platform that's being basically maintained in terms of basic security. And even the security patches coming out are often, and not to say that they're not important, they're extremely important, but a lot of them are for things that you'd already have to have admin access or already have some sort of an elevated permission or such to take advantage of. There's not a ton of them that have been dastardly in recent time because Magento 1 is is a more mature platform in that sense.
It is, yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully the job for your team isn't overwhelming, but we're all here because we've all seen where these things can go south quickly when some new attack vector is discovered, some new security hole, and everybody better get patched fast.
I mean, the other thing is it's not about just the bug bounty, but also Magento 2 is continuously optimized, and also they will fix security issues there. And everyone who's involved with Magento 2 will probably agree here. Magento 2 is a lot of Magento 1.
Yeah.
I mean, you have new wrapping clothes, but at the end, it's a lot of Magento 1. And so there's a saying in Germany, it's old wine in new pipes. So, so the thing is that if they patch Magento 2, we always keep an eye on the Magento 2 upstream, because we will make sure that if this is a part which is also present in Magento 1, we will reintegrate those patches in Magento 1 as well.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
It's a perfect 0 day. If Magento 2.4 is being released and it patches a very severe security vulnerability in Magento 2, and it's something that also is present in Magento 1, I guarantee you there will be a lot of hackers out there jumping on that and hacking the stores, because that's cheap and easy. You already know what's the problem, and you can just hack it right away. And this is why we keep our eyes on Magento 2 as well. And this is a big thing.
Yeah, and look, it's the same way that, if you were to look at the data, a huge percentage of current Magento 1 users or Magento users in general are behind on their PHP version on their server. And luckily, not a big percentage over here at JetRails. Not something that we have as many problems with. We're very, very proactive with it. But when you think about things like that, if hackers know that basically that there are these outdated softwares being run on these servers, and that Magento users are kind of ripe for the picking because they're not patching for it, they're not able to use new versions of PHP because they're not getting patches anywhere anymore. I think that makes it all the more important to continue to be proactive in security to get patched. And there's so many angles to it. I always do like to mention that even with all of these, patches and external security layers and hosting things and what have you, that there's also just general best practice around security that, folks should audit from time to time, make sure that, old developers or extension developers or others don't have admin access to your account, that your passwords are in good shape. I mean, ideally, the only people that should be able to get into your admin should be locked down by IP address to only those that should even be able to access that area of your site in the first place. So there's a lot of things that go into it. We've put out some interesting content over time. I know others have as well, just about, general best practice for any Magento site. It doesn't have to be for an M1. It doesn't have to be because of end of life. So that's that's interesting. But let me roll that into extensions. How do you look at Magento 1 extensions at this point, and how that factors in with your product and long-term viability of M1? I mean, we know that there's already lots of M1 extensions that are unsupported, that have haven't been patched or updated in many years. Some are continuing to be supported, and we could anticipate will be after M1 end of life, because there are extension developers that are just going to keep supporting their user base, especially if there's potential to keep selling M1 extensions to these users. How does it factor in with Mage 1?
Well, we have a lot of conversations with extension and service providers. A lot of them are just saying because Magento 1 stops to support, or Adobe stops to support, we shouldn't, because we have a lot of merchants that rely on us. So we will produce patches for our extensions. So we partner up with them as well. And in that case, if you are using an extension that is being deprecated, or which has been abandoned, or it's not being developed anymore, you can switch to other extensions that fill this gap, which are still maintained. And as you said, general best practice, it's always a good idea when the Magento 1 end of life comes to look into the list of extensions you have in your shop, because we're all coming out from the agency life, and usually you end up with projects at some point of your life cycle where you are mainly reviewing existing code from other agencies which screw up the projects. And you can then you can see a lot of extensions being installed which are heavily outdated, which are actually not used at all. And then there are custom extensions that are changing these codes, probably creating security issues within extensions that are most probably safe. And in that case, it's always a good idea to go through that list and look for things that you can just throw away. So to clean up your code, it's like in software development. Just because you wrote some code, it doesn't mean that the code has to be there for ages. You have to refactor it, to look into it, and to keep it up to date with latest technology. And this should happen with Magento 1 installations in general as well. And for sure, the most important thing for people is payment providers and shipping providers. So most of them are just continuing their services. There was one payment provider who said, okay, with the end of life, we are stopping service for Magento 1 clients. And we've been in contact with them. And at the end, it's still money,
Yeah, so who wants to... I know. So, a few days ago in the United States, SBA loans started to, or the application process, I should say, opened up to small business, here in America. And, I have talked to multiple people that were turned down from applying with their bank, because you have to apply through bank, because they may have had a checking account, a bank account with that bank for decades, but if they didn't also have a credit card, the bank said, we don't want your application. Banks destroying long-term relationships with businesses that have been their clients for years and years, over small things. Obviously, a lot of emotion in the world right now, a lot going on, but it's always, I think, interesting how how these things kind of come together.
At the other end, even if you say as a merchant, okay, I will migrate. It's April.
Yeah.
How should you ever do that? And even if it was when they said, okay, we are stopping the service for our Magento 1 merchants, it was just, I think, 10 months or so. So it's absolutely impossible for a merchant to switch to a new platform. Not even speaking about Magento 2. There are other platforms as well, and migrating to them might be cheaper, but still it's a lot of time that you have to put into thinking about it, reevaluating stuff, developing, testing, deploying. So at the end, it's just a year.
I think that the platform in question, I had read the communication at the time. It's definitely come up in some of the material that I put out there as an important note. I think that they were looking at it as there's no viable way toward PCI compliance here. And so as a payment provider, we don't want to suggest that this is an okay thing. That we don't want to walk down this road. We want you to take it seriously, that you need to be on a secure platform that can be compliant. Again, that was before I think things like Mage 1 had hit their radar. So I don't imagine that we'll run into quite as much of that, but I would always caution anyone that's going to be staying on Magento 1 past Magento 1's end of life. Be in touch with your payment provider. Be in touch with anyone that you have an ongoing relationship with, whether it's a SaaS provider or web host, agency, developers. Make sure that they're on board to keep supporting you on Magento 1. There are folks that would love to have your business in all different walks of the e-commerce ecosystem. I wouldn't wait to find out that someone is going to stop service. But like you say, if merchants are going to keep paying, and if there are as many Magento 1 merchants as we're currently projecting there will be after M1's end of life, I think that these businesses can enjoy some safety in numbers, that they won't be complete outliers.
I mean, we're talking about 100,000 installations of Magento 1. So Sanguine Security runs the numbers from time to time. And I think it was a month ago or so, or 2 months ago, Willem just ran the numbers and he said, okay, we have a decreasing number of Magento 1 installations out there. And we currently have about 200 something. And with this, with the decreasing rate, we might end up with a little bit more than 100,000 shops in July 2020. So there will be 100,000 installations out there probably not being secure anymore if they don't do anything. And for sure, all those installations, there might be some abandoned shops or test installations or whatever, but still it's a pretty interesting number of merchants still running on Magento 1, and probably, especially because of the Corona crisis at the moment, a lot of agencies have to deal with home office, decreased performance of teams because you don't have everyone in one room.
And everyone's got kids at home and and spouses that are also trying to use the internet while their entire neighborhood is trying to use Netflix and Zoom and anything else. And, there's all sorts of challenges coming up. I absolutely agree. Let me pivot that one to ask, your team has now been getting more press within the Magento community. I would imagine that more merchants are hearing about Mage 1 and looking more in depth, especially those that might be seeing delays for one reason or another in going to a different platform. Have you seen an increase of your days elongated, as a result of just, a bit of a perfect storm going on here?
I mean, yeah, for sure. There's an increased interest in Mage 1 at the moment. I don't know whether it's just the regular growth of our outreach there, because we are doing webinars, we're doing podcasts, we're partnering up with other companies, for example, JetRails. And so we're just spreading the word, and our partners are spreading the word as well. So there's more visibility of Mage 1. The primarily demand comes from agencies at the moment, because I don't think that Mage 1 specifically can address merchants, because a merchant usually is a person that works with trust. Yeah. And the only person you trust regarding your online shop activities is your agency, because they are alongside with you all the day. And if you have a problem, you reach out to them. And in that case, I'm pretty sure that they will ask their agency, what should we do? And then the agency has to find a way to deal with the problem here. And then they are investigating and saying, okay, there's something like OpenMage, there's something like Mage 1, there is probably hosting companies that have built-in solutions, which at the end, to be honest, just boils down to OpenMage or Mage 1 at either end. Yeah. So at the end, they will reach out to us and ask what are the possibilities here for agencies, how can we keep our merchants safe with Magento 1, because we are doing some replatforming, but it will probably end in July 2021. And then we say, okay, that's what we are here for.
Yeah. I bet that at this point we're starting to wind up with some mutual agency partners and relationships that, I know on my side, I've been trying to keep an eye, on the agencies that we're working with that are specifically part of this conversation with us, talking about how they're going to continue to support their Magento 1 users. I think it's an important conversation for all of us to keep having out there in the community, because I have a lot of respect for those folks that are going to really, in the coming months, really stick to Magento 2. But, there are merchants out there, like we say, 100,000 businesses that will continue to need M1 support in one fashion or another. So we'll continue to try to be a resource to our clients and making sure that they have the resources that they need across the board. If they get stuck somewhere, and even if it's with payments or something else, to find the right resources so they can keep thriving. I do imagine that we'll have some more content on the podcast soon enough, tackling some of those topics as others, pick up the torch with us to continue to talk about how Magento 1 users can continue to not only exist but thrive for the foreseeable future on a really tried and tested platform. Rico, it's been a pleasure chatting with you today. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
At the end, I don't know whether you can hear that, but it's a siren, which is very great because security is an important topic. And to be honest, I don't care whether you sign up for Mage 1 or you find another option. We from Mage 1, we just founded the company because we want to make sure that merchants can stay safe, even with the smallest shops. That's why we are pretty cheap at the lower end of our pricing scale. We believe in the community. That's why we are reaching out to a lot of partners. We try to find a pricing or price list that really helps everyone. Just make sure that you upgrade your software. And if you are using Windows XP, you better upgrade.
Yeah, please upgrade. Well, with that, I always like to say thank you to our listeners. Public service announcement that you're going to continue to hear from me at the moment if you're tuning in. There are initiatives out there if you know a merchant that is hurting right now for one reason or another, whether that's an offline merchant that needs to get online quickly. There are programs like Offline to On, which has 1,000 plus members of the eCommerce community pitching in to help get folks online fast and get the resources that they need. A lot of us volunteering our time and resources and donating resource. There are other programs for merchants that are more established. I'll make sure to share some links in the show description and notes. And, if anyone is out there looking for the right resources to get help quickly or cost effectively or in any other fashion, we certainly want to be cheerleaders for those that need help and to be part of this community and to stand with you. So please do reach out with any other thoughts, including other topics that we might be able to cover for you on the podcast that would be helpful to you and those that you work with. Thank you as always for tuning in, and stay safe, stay healthy, and happy selling.